Member Rudd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity of delivering this my maiden speech. And I'd like to start by congratulating all the other new members who have spoken so elegantly and so eloquently, and particularly recently the member for Rossendale and Darwen, whose maiden speech was both well conceived and comfortably delivered. I represent the constituency of Hastings and Rye. Of course, it is only us who call them constituencies. To my constituents, it is home, it is where they live, it's where they bring up their families, and that is something I will never forget. 6 weeks since the general election, I'm still getting a little lost, getting from one room to the next, between the staircases and the lifts, but I remain impressed, humbled, not a little relieved to be in these historic corridors and part of this historic coalition. I know that part of my responsibility is to live up to the example of the previous Member of Parliament for Hastings and Rye, Michael Foster. Michael Foster was the epitome of a good constituency MP. He was immensely popular, not just because of the individual acts that he did for local residents, but because of his high visibility locally and because of his successful lobbying of the then government for additional funds for the town. Unfortunately for him, his popularity grew in inverse proportion to that of his government's. But I recognise that he set a very high bar in terms of service, and it is one that I will try to reach and hopefully at some stage exceed. The fruits of his success are evident in Hastings. We have a new train station, we have a new further education college, we have a new university centre and 2 new state-of-the-art offices. However, physical regeneration has not yet translated into economic regeneration. Our offices are still largely empty, the train services are still poor, and on the index of multiple deprivation, Hastings remains 29th from the bottom. We have some of the lowest wages and highest unemployment in the whole of the country, let alone the southeast. Cynics might be forgiven for thinking that Labour's regeneration has been a triumph of style over substance so far. The makeup is in place, but I'm afraid the wrinkles are still very much there. But deprivation is only one part of Hastings, and Hastings is only one part of an area of contrasts and variations. My constituency feels very much like a microcosm of the country, with urban and rural areas, with farmland adjacent to idyllic estates and idyllic villages next to deprived wards. We are the custodians of England's most famous date, perhaps more famous than May the 6th, 2010. Let me introduce the colleagues to this wonderful aspect of my constituency. Hastings, Rye and the village of Winchelsea. We're all parts of the Cinque Ports that were put together in the 11th century to keep out seafaring invaders and for the mutual benefit of trade and fishing. Each place has its own unique character. I would urge members to come and spend your summer holidays with us. You can enjoy local produce, the source of modern English history, top quality entertainment, fresh air and exercise, and for the more sedentary amongst us, fish and chips and slot machines. You can even walk in the shadow of genuine dinosaur footprints, which may appeal to some members opposite. Tourism is an essential ingredient of what we have to offer. Hotels and boarding houses boast that they have been popular with visitors since 1066. Visitors, of course, have not always been so popular with them. We have fantastic beaches, wonderful countryside, arguably the world's most remarkable heritage. We have flourishing language schools visited from students all over the world, and we have a community that welcomes them with open arms, not to mention open tills, because we need the business. Like many towns, we suffer from the coastal problem of being at the end of the line. Looking over previous maiden speeches, over the past 40 to 50 years, there has been a recurring theme, and it is transport. The A21 getting down to Hastings It needs renewing. It needs improvement. Our survival and prosperity depends on access. There is no point having these wonderful facilities if people can't access the facilities. And it unquestionably puts off employers and tourists, both of which we need, that it is so difficult to get to our part of the world. And I talk to you from a constituency that has 43% of its workforce working in the public sector. We are like an island. We know the way the tide is going. We need to attract the private sector to try and take up some of that unemployment. And I fear that much of the money that has already been spent in my constituency will fail to improve the economy if we don't do something about it. For too long, we have been the underprivileged cousin of the South East. Many of my constituents have suffered terribly from an economy that has quite simply left them behind. So I have two important considerations for my constituency of Hastings and Rye. Transport. Now, I recognise the particular financial situation that we find ourselves in. There have to be cuts. We've inherited a very difficult legacy. But I would urge the front bench to consider not making them to certain important, vital infrastructure projects upon which everything else depends. From our point of view in my constituency, that is a link road to open up the area to more jobs, more employers, and it is improvements to the A21, and it is better rail transport. We must be accessible to prosper. Conservatives, above all, understand the importance of enterprise and of encouraging private sector growth so that families and communities can grow on their own. There's been talk today about the high-skilled economy, and I agree we all need that for our country to advance. But I would like to draw members, Madam Deputy Speaker, and members' attention to a very old trade. In Hastings, we have the largest beach-launched fishing fleet in Europe. In Rye, we have an important port and fishing fleet. They have been treated shamefully over the past 15 years. In the 90s, there were 44 fishing vessels leaving Hastings. Now it is 20, and they eke out a precarious living. These are men who earn their living in a traditional, honest, environmentally friendly way, battling with the sea and the dangers of the deep. But the Common Fisheries Policy, as enforced by DEFRA, has made their lives impossible. In 2005, there were prosecutions of these fishermen. The role of government must be to help people, not to put them out of business. Their way of life needs bailing out. Our Fisheries Minister understands the issue and the urgency and has visited Hastings twice. But we can't wait for full renegotiation of the Common Fisheries Policy. We need change now, with the cod season approaching and difficulties right ahead of us. We need a government that protects our fisheries and our fishermen. I would urge for particular consideration of coastal towns. This government recognises the importance of promoting private sector growth. I hope we can demonstrate that in Hastings and Rye by supporting better transport links and securing a fairer deal for fishermen. All we ask is a fair wind and an even keel. Yeah.